Well, in Houston, I'm John Herder. Tuesday, September 14th. Great as always to have you along, everybody. In a nutshell, From the Experts is a compressed virtual networking accelerator, helping people across industries connect very quickly in a brief, moderated, interactive show format. It's like a TED Talk with interactive discussion. So how does it work? Well, there's a 15-minute expert talk followed by the 20-minute group discussion, where you can share questions and feedback verbally or with text in the chat box. So what's in it for you, you ask? Well, the FTE promise. If all goes well, your curiosity sparked, new ideas are accelerating into action, and you may have helped yourself or somebody else solve a problem, make a connection, reaching the opportunity faster. We know that making authentic connections and expanding your networks has never been more important to your business and your well-being. Folks, help me welcome guest expert Lisa Wardlaw. So Lisa is sorry, I lost my spot there. Lisa is a highly accomplished multinational Fortune 100 strategy and innovation executive with tons of finance, operational, and digital experience transforming businesses, driving profit, growth, and new revenue streams in emerging markets. Lisa recently joined ICI, a space technology startup company, where she'll be leading their global insurance practice. Lisa, so grateful to have you here with us on FTE, highlighting a challenge that you're very familiar with and passionate about, unlocking and harnessing the digital potential within a company's organization. So let's get right to it. Set the scene for us, Lisa, would you?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's great to be here with everyone that could take time out of their busy Zoom schedules to attend and support one another. I'm really looking forward to not only sharing, I guess my perspective and the things that I've gone through, but really hearing from you all about similarities, whether or not you faced or encountered similar observations. Yeah. So I'll set the stage with like the promise, right? And I know, I guess I'll kind of drop a mic bomb at the beginning. I am a digital transformation expert. I spend a lot of time being, I'll call it a kamikaze mission, going against that brick wall, chiseling it out with a plastic spoon. But what the real problem statement that I really want to talk to you all about is that this mission and this mandate, we kind of think it's all about the digital and the tech and how we get it together and how we solve this really hard problem. And in my experience, it is absolutely not rejected because we didn't necessarily have the right solution or a pragmatic solution or an innovative solution. In my experience, it's this intense juxtaposition between the way organizations are actually constructed. So I do not mean change management. And if we have any HR colleagues on the phone, I'd love to hear from you all, like as we get to this deep discussion part. But it wasn't like these traditional project management things. It wasn't change management. It was literally, and then I'm just going to pause here because we're going to circle all the way back to it. It was that, and I don't even know how this dawned on me. There was no book about it, hint, hint, for my authors out there. There was no roadmap about it, but I crashed into this. I called it the linear architecture of org structures, verticals and structures that were created for predictability, for rote, for repeatability, and to create like literally almost intentional silos. And yes, I've worked in more organizations than I should acknowledge. So I've done matrix and hierarchical and all sorts of dotted lines, cross lines. But even then, I started like this quest of like, my real problem was, okay, why is the org structure itself creating what I'll call the organ digital and like this digital transformation and this digital acceptance? We were rejecting it like a foreign object, and not because, yes, people don't make change and et cetera. So really what I want to talk to you all about today is how I had to tackle digital transformation, literally not just the tech, not just the solution, not just to create outcomes, not ideas. And my good friend Greg is on as well, is like quoting his book, but like how do I tackle it when the very foundation of what I operate in, because until Monday, I was in corporate America, now I'm in the startup world, the very foundation of the organization wasn't set up, and it's still not set up to actually support the digital revolution. So like, if you really go back in time, it's like this evolution that hasn't occurred. We've evolved everything other than our, in my mind, our org structure. So that's the promise you'll hear today during the show. The detailed problem underneath that is that this muscle memory is so strong, right? So even when we use words like collaborate or cross-functional, it like pulls you back. And you think of like, well, okay, I'm in charge of X. And I happen to be fortunate in my role in that I had two very strong functional areas reporting to me. So I was an executive, and I had all of operations and all of finance, which I would say is actually maybe a rarity in digital transformation. And in addition to that, I had digital transformation. So I had a very clear mandate. I had a pretty wide span of control. And I went after this to say, okay, great. Like I'll own what I need to change. So ops, finance, and digital transformation kind of bundled into one. And what I found was, when I was like, how do I hire for the ops function, but create employees who like want to be engaged and not work in these traditional paths? So one was just, how do I get like the simple process of recruiting, right? Now I'm recruiting in a web concept, in a much more ambiguous, like I tried to eliminate job descriptions and like hierarchical, like I tried to create pod or pooling concepts of resources. So like that people didn't actually belong to a person. So like to eliminate that vertical, like 3-to-1 kind of relationship that we're all kind of like tried and true that we grow up with. So when I started doing this, and we could talk a little bit about, like, I was like, how do I break down the hierarchical slant? How do I get on planes and go to them? Again, I was coming from the world of insurance, so I was trying to look much more like a Valley girl than an insurance person. So like started there, right? But it was really to break down the hierarchy, to break down these verticals, to start to penetrate through all these different layers. And so I was successful. I did build a transformation team of 20 people that use this kind of web capabilities concept. We can talk about, I use some tools that we're doing like AI indexing, using industrial psychology underneath it. How do I look for the right competencies? Happy to, if you're interested in any of that, I'm not here to sell what I use because it was like a third-party tool, but I was trying to get underneath the layer. But then the bigger problem became, they felt like outsiders on the inside because, they actually didn't have the benefit of being a lab or an innovation team or, they were business transformation, but their jobs were to transform our as-is business model that had P&L owners, that had verticals and silos, et cetera. And so even though I'd created this, like, in essence, this ambiguous nonlinear org structure, they were kind of coalescing with the rest of the organization, right? Which is linear, which is rote, which is, rigid, if you want to think about it like that. So I guess if I want to be sensitive to time, if I kind of highlight the solution at the time that I started deploying, and I'm in no way, shape, or form, I've met my journey here. Like, I'm still on a journey to unlock this like holy grail of what do we really do? How do we really create new work structures? So I changed the hiring process. I eliminated all hierarchy. And again, this might seem a little, it wasn't flagrant in any way, but I made HR not a first or a continued point of contact. So not a traditional recruiter point of contact. It was generally me, because I was really trying to change the dynamic of who we are, how we do business, and how we engage with talent. So again, eliminating that perception of, in essence, of process and of hierarchies. I did also start to look at competency, AI, digital things. So apps. So I was like, you absolutely can't send somebody to do a 30-minute online thing. Like, how can they do it in an app? How can they get value out of the score? So really tried to think of the value proposition for the candidate as well as ourselves. And then also I started learning about things underneath that with my team, which is like, as an example, most people value collaboration. It's like one of the most used words. Right. Well, if you're trying to really transform and kind of rip out the guts of an organization and do things differently, you actually have to have a high tolerance for not necessarily being liked or not necessarily winning people over. Like, you need to be able to be firm sometimes, and in a way that, okay, yes, it's professional, but that kind of has a different connotation than collaboration. And so I started sifting through my as team members, some of my allies, like through these tests that people were like willing to do because it was like cool. It was like an app. It was gamified. It was actually super affordable too, side note. And so I was able to implement it, but I was able to kind of get these data points that allowed me to actually see like, oh, I was always thinking that person was so great because they could document a process, but they might have been like one of like, even like within my own team, they may have been one of the blockers to like, I'll call it sustainable, like ambiguity, right? Like, how do we get to that part where ambiguity is okay and comfortable, where we don't need certainty? And then I guess one other solution, this was a little more, I guess, difficult. The organization was rolling out these things called role mandates. I mean, I don't even know. Like, I think it was either Bain or Boston Consulting Group. And again, no disrespect. It's like been a heralded beacon of, we all need clarity to make quick decisions, racing matrices, et cetera. And so I had to get rid of that for my organization. But then the other thing I had to do was get my peers and my stakeholders to interact with us without that clarity of roles and decisions. And most importantly, without that fear of threat, right? Because a lot of people feel that the transformation teams or the innovation teams or whatever, they're like the pet project, stealing, getting all the heavily guarded money that, most of us can't get a new Excel like update installed on our laptop. And so who are these people that get to come in with the, the Ferraris and stuff? So I had to be conscientious of all those things. So I guess when I boil it all down and, would love to kind of talk about this as part of our discussion group, I really came back to these key takeaways, right? So the first one will seem obvious, but I really want to put like an exclamation point by it, because like we all say, you've got to be all in. You've got to own your initiative. You got to drive it, et cetera. But all in means that you're willing to jump off that cliff. Like, you're willing to take the risk that other people aren't willing to take. And you're willing to, in essence, like kind of form the front line, the battle, so that the organization, when it comes at you, you've got to be the one standing there. You cannot expect that to be your people. And you certainly can't expect it to be like, honestly, like a function that you're like, hey, like, go do this, right? Like my HR partners were great partners, but I took the risk of what we were doing, right? Like, I had to like really lean in on that. My second key takeaway is, you cannot, it's not like the go it alone, but you need philosophical alignment with your allies. Not just like, yes, I'm your ally and we agree to shake hands and be collaborative because this is a mandate, because you're trying to ultimately change the work structure that's linear. And you need an ally that doesn't mind cross-pollination of teams, and that is okay with subjectivity, that is okay with rotational concepts. So I really had to, and by the way, like, most of my allies couldn't get there on a total non-linear org structure. So I had to start really small. Like, what if we did like a 2-week rotation once a quarter, or like whatever that means, right? So we really had to start there. That's on the ally. And then, I would say on the like, the third thing is like, you're going to experience this incredible, relentless muscle mem of the organization. Not just against change. And that was the magic for me. I kept thinking it was change management. The ROIs, the KPIs, the way that most people are rewarded will the organization is actually constructed to reject this type of transformation. And it's not just because of, who we are as humans, that we don't like doing new things, but the way the organization is actually set up is that the very muscle man of the organization is going to say no. And then you're sitting over here saying, but this is my mandate. Like, I have to do this, right? Like, this is what not only I'm called upon doing, this is what's going to fuel us into, like, even if you care about like money, stock options, like all the things you're supposed to like fiduciarily do when you're an officer of the company, these are the things that are going to fuel us forward. And then I guess my last takeaway would be that, I have not actually seen like an org structure of the future. And so my big call to action, and the reason why I was like honored to be part of this talk today, and the reason why I'm so ecstatic that you all have taken time out of your busy schedules to join, is what does the org structure of the digital revolution need to look like, right? Because I think we've all got, PowerPoint can give us a lot of pre-drop down selections, and we can go from hierarchical to matrix and all these things, but how do we really operate in this new world where, things are no longer verticals and they're more what I call like, more latitudinal, less longitudinal. And then of course, I think I'll just kind of like wrap on this. We're in a world where never has it been more important for diversity, equity, inclusion of ideas, not just people, background, et cetera, but of the entirety of it. And so if you think about creating inclusion, it is really to ensure that we all have this basis to lift up, all ideas can like permeate, and that by the way, none of us are precluded from taking something forward. It's not your technical training, it's not your title, it's not your background. It's like, how do we really kind of, spin something up and make it real? And so I think not only is the call to action on like, what does the org structure of the future need to look like? It should also connect to, like our education, our business classes, like how do we actually do this in a way that gives us as leaders some sense of, I'll say protection, right? Because being a nonconformist and saying things like these in an organization, they look at you like you're crazy. And so anyway, with that, I definitely look forward to the discussion. And John, I'll turn it back to you. I haven't been looking at the chat, but I'll start to pop over.
Yeah, that's okay. Cool. Thanks a lot, Lisa. So, hey, folks, today's show is brought to you by our underwriters. Arion, the full service project engineering and design firm, respected, trusted, highly valued by select energy industry clients. Unique Ventures, the energy hybrid technology accelerator with a unique approach to venture capital. Porter Hedges, attorneys at law, the informed choice for complicated litigation in the energy business. Interpoint, protecting what you care about most, people, profits, brand. Clients Benefits Group, building retirement plans for your business that work. From the Experts is excited to announce new partnerships with the Canon and Ecosystems 2030. We're collaborating to bring our strengths into unique combinations that enhance your experience. More to come soon. Okay, Lisa, let's go ahead and open this floor and get some of the feedback from the group. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn the poll question on. Actually, Gus, you'll have to turn the poll on for everybody. And if you would also kindly drop our general question to get things rolling. So as you answer the question, folks, feel free to step up to the mic, drop your questions and any feedback that you've got into the chat. And if I call on you, you're welcome to also say pass and move right along. So keep it brief and introduce yourself with your name and company. So here's the question. What organizations would you say have actually transformed themselves into this model, a digital leader? And why do you think so? So with that, what I'd like to do is, Bhushan, you still with us here? Would you mind sharing kind of your reflection on that for us? Get us started.
Sure. Thank you. I'm Bhushan Sethi. I had the pleasure of Lisa being my client and some of those stories, and I'm glad I didn't get name dropped as one of those firms that mandate. But some quick reflections. So when Lisa was describing this, we could have replaced the word org structure with culture. We could have replaced it with kind of decision-making processes. And the reason I share that is, in our experience, and when I think about firms that do this well, it's not just one thing. It's about the structure, but it's also about how you make decisions. It's about the people and their comfort with ambiguity. So it gets into things like culture and behaviors. Someone put something around kind of senior executives and their incentives. It's absolutely around things like incentives. So even for firms like, when I think about PwC, we've done a really good job of digitizing our business and creating digital products. And so we're there, but we're not like a tech firm. We talk about being a tech firm, but we are not like a tech firm. And then the question about innovation and digital transformation, I'd still think firms like mine still have a long way to go around the pure innovation, not because of the structure, but probably because of the
I guess there you go.
Yeah, I just dropped out. Sorry. I was just going to say, and on the innovation agenda, I'm not sure. I'm in the office, and it's ironic that my wireless drops out in the office. On the innovation agenda, firms like mine still have ways to go, not necessarily because of structure, but because of culture and risk tolerance and incentives, and kind of just learned habits of big successful firms. So I think everything's spot on. I just think that structure is kind of one element within that, and different firms have different kind of levers they pull.
Any particular model out there that you think is on the front edge of this?
If you would have asked me 15 years ago, 10 years ago, I would have said that model where you incubate it somewhere, like one of the insurance companies I work with did actually incubate it somewhere, hire really good people from the Valley to go build it there. And that will, and you have the right management oversight. But I've seen flaws in that model because it's the whole not invented here syndrome, and it's a bunch of brainiacs who don't really understand the rhythm of the business. So I think that, I know this sounds like a consulting answer, there are many models that work, but you've got to have the right people and the right culture and the right experimentation and the right leadership. Like, you've got to have the right candid conversations, and you've got to be instructive sometimes. Sometimes you have to be super inclusive, and you've got to pick those battles.
Thanks for that. Greg Larkin, introduce yourself. Do you have any comments on this?
Hi, I'm Greg Larkin. I wrote the book, This Might Get Me Fired, and I used to be the global head of new products at Bloomberg, and have advised PwC amongst Google and Uber and many other companies ever since. I have a lot of thoughts on the matter. I guess yeah, I don't think there's a single right model, and I think there's a debate over the right level of autonomy for innovation. And when it's over autonomous, it actually becomes a decoy very often, and it makes digital transformation that much harder. Some of the infrastructure that gets built in the part of the business that's launching new ventures that could be useful for modernizing or turning around legacy businesses, that conversation never happens. And some of the scaffolding in the legacy business that can be used to bring new ventures to scale faster never gets deployed. So I think there was a time when autonomy became sort of an orthodox, like, well, Clay Christensen said that's how it works, so that's how it works. And I think it's very few examples of autonomy working.
So one of the things that comes to my mind is you have to have senior management and the board incentivized, right? How do you help this change, the team that's going to change, when you're advising the leadership teams versus the transformation team? What's going on there?
So I have a very simple rule of thumb, which is pretend Carl Icahn just took over your company. And it works every time, because as much as we might want to say, well, that's not the model I like. And BCG has one set of standards and Bain is another and PwC another. At the end of the day, every 90 days, your executive leadership team has to stand in front of a bunch of investors and justify how they've spent investors' money. And within that rubric, within everything starts there. Every argument ends there. Every mandate either is deflated or has wind in its sails because of what happens in those meetings every 90 days, like it or not, fair or unfair. And so within that, it's the rule of 20, which is you have to be able to put points on the board from 20x returns on new ventures and 20% turnarounds of legacy businesses. If you can't figure out how everything you're investing in, every dollar you spend ladders up into 20x or 20%, you will never be able to overcome the intricate defense of obstructionism that exists inside of every company, from Google to Golden Corral.
So Greg, quick question. Is there a particular model or a company that's kind of doing this right that you've worked with or that you admire?
I don't know that it's a model, is the emergence of AWS as, kind of a side project, which was not autonomous. Is that modelable for other organizations? I'm not sure. Is the emergence of Alphabet X within Google an emulatable model? I don't know. I've seen it backfire. You can, it's like, it's kind of a crummy metaphor, but like on some fundamental level, both North Korea and Sweden can both trace the inspiration of their economy to the works of Karl Marx. Right. That doesn't make that like, right. I don't know. You can look at like the disaster that GE has become, and you can also look at the miracle of Google and trace it back to the innovator's dilemma.
Right.
And so I think being overly dogmatic about the model and under represents the importance of putting the rule of 20 on the board. The outcome is the model. And right. The ability to shift and adapt the model when it's not delivering the rule of 20 results is much more important than settling on a model before you start. And I think having that kind of test and learn and the ability to have really excellent investment capabilities where you're not walking around with a bunch of zombie ventures that should have been disinvested, where capital should have been pulled out and reallocated to something that's winning, or a bunch of digital transformations and legacy businesses that have had massive amounts of capital, but also massive amounts of invalidation. And the model is so rigid that you can't reallocate capital and redefine strategy. I think the model has to be outcome centric. And in particular, it has to be, can you defend this in front of Carl Icahn?
Nice. I like that. So let's open it up. Anybody else have something to share on this or something related that Lisa said? Any questions?
John?
Yeah. Hey, Robert.
Hey, this is Robert Applebaum. I'm with IBML. I go back years ago on a project I was on an SAP COE Center of Excellence. And in my IT career of over 30 years, it's the only time I've been on a project now. Those had their challenges getting them implemented. But as an organization with the CEO and CIO behind us and having the business units all coming to the table with the technologists who were a part of the project, and that included DBAs, application, the programmers, it's really the only time in my career where I've seen an organization have the focus, the desire, and also behind it, obviously from the executive level, the budget, because their eyes were on it for profitability and where the company was heading at the time. And it's the only time I've seen that really work. Now, I'm not saying that, by the way, SAP, I'm not promoting it. I'm with a company, haven't used SAP now in 20 years. But it's the only time in my career where I've worked in hospitals, insurance companies, retail. It's the only time I've seen a group of people come together from HR, finance, all the different groups, and technology and executive sponsors, where everybody could sit in the room and everybody could hear everybody and the impact, whether it really impacted them, that change, or what was going on. But the fact was, at least there was unity and everybody was hearing the same thing at the same time. And I think a lot of organizations have a hard time just flat out with communication, that areas seem to be left behind, or they weren't in the know. They didn't know this was going to happen. I didn't know this was how my job was going to change. And if I was starting a project myself, I mean, in my career, that would be the one thing I would use parts of that as a way to try to get something off the ground that would have better chance of success than the way the majority of the way projects are done today with digital transformation, especially when it deals across functional areas as it does today.
Interesting. Feedback?
I think Robert's right on cross-functional. If looking at solutions and you're only looking at silo solutions versus if they can go across the, all the departments and how it's going to impact them. Because if an organization is, like Lisa was saying, it's just worried about their little vertical silos, then you will not get a product that will continue to grow within your organization. So cross-functional allows you to grow a solution like SAP. You added all the modules. So it was you start small, you crawl, and then you're able to bring all these other, especially in oil and gas where, it's years of organization. You're not going to go in, Lisa, I don't care how big you are, and I'm a pretty big guy and I'm pretty vocal. You're not going to, it's hard to change that organization. It's like that 800-pound gorilla. You got to chip away. But cross-functional, Robert, I've seen it, and I think that's how, when they see the value, they see the opportunity to help that organization, then you can break down some barriers.
Question about that, guys. So times were different, Robert, a little bit. This idea of smartphones and multitasking and the 8-second attention span, right? So I wonder if that's some of it too, kind of protecting and going after the outcomes and being able to do that. I don't know. Anybody else have any questions or comments based on the conversation, or something that you'd like to ask Lisa about in her experience?
I just lost that 8 seconds. Sorry, John.
Right. Case in point. Thanks. Appreciate that.
Yeah, Hani here. I used to work in the energy industry until October last year. Since then, I'm doing my own thing, basically working with startups, entrepreneurs, mostly in the digital area. But my last job with Shell was two things: digitalization lead for our deep water business, and also I was working with an innovation program called Game Changer, which started like 20 years ago. And the whole point of it was bringing Silicon Valley inside of a corporation. So it was created by Gary Hamel and a couple of others from IDEO Labs, with the intent that, how can you incubate innovation in an organization, still, keep your pulse on the business needs, and at the same time be sufficiently removed from the core. Anyway, what I wanted to comment on is that I really think that digital transformation is one of those things which is like the North Star, okay? It's one of those things you will always aspire to, but never get to. And then the way, at least I define it, is there a spectrum. And when a lot of companies are talking about digital transformation, all they're really doing is digitizing existing processes, okay? And so really that spectrum has to do with how much you're willing to reimagine how you interact with internally, externally, with your vendors, with your suppliers, as well as with your customers. Because digital transformation, ultimately, what the big promise, let's say, of the trillions of dollars of value to be created, is if you're able to fundamentally change your business, not just make it more efficient, do the same thing you're doing now, faster, cheaper, better. That's all great, but doesn't fundamentally shift things. Now, the dilemma with digital transformation is that both at once, companies must, and I think several people have talked about that, you must be able to, think big in terms of systems and think forward in terms of reimagining the future. And at the same time, on the ground, you have to be delivering tangible outcomes. And that's a dilemma, right? It's difficult. And it requires both, standardizing and automating and optimizing your processes, as well as, prophesying, if you like, forecast, what could happen in the future if you were to change something fundamentally, and then figure out new ways to monetize your value chains by removing barriers, removing friction between your supply and demand, for example. And then importantly, for a big corporation, you need to customize. So you have to, customer centricity is at the core of digital transformation. And it's a very difficult thing to do for big corporations, because on the one hand, you want to standardize things to the point where you dumb it down and you just repeat it, or so-called scale it. At the same time, it needs to be so intricately linked to each nuance, to each application, to each customer. And that's a difficult thing to do. And only a handful of companies have really managed to do that. Think Amazon, they basically created a digital twin of you, right? So they can sell you all the things that you want, not that everybody in the world wants. And it's just a difficult thing to do. The digital transformation is hard. 80% of the digital transformation efforts fail for many of the reasons that have already been talked about. And because it needs all axes firing together, the process axis, the technology axis, the people axis, and as somebody mentioned, the culture, which is kind of the environment in which all of these processes, technologies, and people interact. All of that has to change, including the org chart ultimately. But it's tough. It's never going to be easy.
Thanks, Hani.
That's what I wanted to share. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm glad you could join us today. Comments?
Can I throw in my 2 cents here, John? I think just relating to what was said before, completely agree that this needs to be an all-in change, as Lisa said. It has to be a cross-functional effort. But what I think is also extremely important, that it needs to start at the top. It needs to come from the top, and it needs to loop back to the top, because unless there is a full alignment and a full understanding of why this solution is fit for purpose for this organization, then we will go back to the silos, and we will go back to even different organizations understanding what digital means for their silos. And that, of course, is counterproductive, because every organization can throw in tons of money for their own solutions that ultimately don't jive well with each other. I think the biggest 2 dangers for these transformations would be to have piecemeal transformations in organizational silos, because ultimately those solutions will not work with one another. And then ultimately the second one is endless experimentation with organizational models, which also happens if there is no alignment at the top. Because coming from a large organization as well, I can tell you that a big organizational change is extremely disruptive, and it can throw back your digitalization efforts. It can throw back all the efforts and make you start from the beginning. A lot of companies are experimenting now, which is reasonable, but I think this could be improved quite a bit by alignment from the beginning and understanding of the basic terms and where you want to be when this digital transformation is done.
I agree, but I believe a lot of times this is where it fails, because you get a leader who you have to then provide that big picture, and they have invest a lot of money. They'll have to, and they want to go into the PwCs and then it gets to be that 800 pound. I'm going to go back to the gorilla. Now you got this big gorilla, and if you start failing, nobody wants to talk to the leader to say, hey, we went the wrong direction with this software. It really is not what we were sold, and we got to back up. And we need, so chipping at it with a leader I agree with the big leader, but how we present it to the leader and roll it out is really critical.
Thanks, Wade. Thanks, Natalia. So Lisa, last word from you.
Well, I was just going to say thank you to everyone. Amazing dialogue, discussion, and humbled and honored by the expertise around the call today. But I guess the one thing that I was going to like end on, like the kind of consistent theme I keep hearing, right, is we need people who are thinkers. We need to raise, train, employ, reward, promote, engage with people who are not afraid to think. And fundamentally across everything we've been talking about, right, it's the problem solving aspect of all this. And I do agree, Basan, like it's probably just not the org structure, but it's the thinking. And we need to embed, which just fascinatingly, right, the Industrial Revolution, and I know none of us want to think for the past X number of decades, we've been trained to be rote, but in essence, we have, right? And so the digital era has so much capability, almost like at our fingertips, that now that thinking layer needs to, that muscle needs to really be, you know, if you will, flexed so that we can like build that muscle again. So that's like the one key thing I keep coming back to. And again, honored by all the perspectives today. So thank you, John, for having me.
Appreciate it. Last word. So folks, how was the talk and discussion today? The FTE post show notes will hit your email soon. Please take that 5-question survey to get the list of all the folks that joined the call today. You'll also find links from the expert website, our YouTube channels, our podcasts. So please help yourself to those. If it was a good experience today, please share FTE with others that you want to network with. Forward our newsletters, follow us on LinkedIn, and invite your connections to join the conversation at our events. Do you or somebody you know want to be a guest expert just like Lisa? Share that current challenge, get feedback on what you're working on with the network. Hey, or maybe you or your firm want to build virtual presence and community with FTE in a unique way that will showcase your thought leadership. Call us. Next on FTE, October 19th, PwC partner Liz Swigert shares her experience on fostering wellness and mental health for employee productivity. November 16th, Future of Technology miniseries begins with leveraging virtual reality technology into immersive experience solutions, led by Adipad Virdi, creative product lead for Facebook virtual reality. So sign up right now on our website, fte.network, or just hit the green button on one of our newsletters. Folks, we're out of time. Thanks once again, Lisa, and to all of you for making FTE Tuesdays the smartest 45 minutes in your day. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next time.